items, and then we will jump right in. Many of you are joining us from PIJC subscriber schools. The PIGC is the Public Interest Jobs Clearinghouse. You're able to attend this event because your school currently subscribes to that listserv. If you'd like to continue to stay connected to that resource and to this community at large after you graduate, please consider joining our organization. As a member, you get access to incredible benefits, including the PIJC, as well as member-only events, discounts to many of our events, including tonight, our mentoring program, and more. With that being said, our mentoring program is launching today for folks who are either graduating in December of 2024 or have already graduated. You are eligible to join our mentoring program as a mentee. This gives you the opportunity to connect to the public interest community and get more involved with mentors that are, 5 years into the career that you are interested in. We also have incredible upcoming events, including our summer pro bono and public interest forum. This forum is an incredible opportunity to learn more about pro bono and public interest work here in Washington, D.C., including our keynote panel that covers our general topic, as well as our 6 substantive panels. If you are currently a summer associate or a summer intern, it might be possible that your organization will cover your ticket. Feel free to reach out to your program coordinator to see if that's something that is open and available to you. We also have other upcoming events, including an open houses of the DC Superior Court Domestic Relations Branch and Domestic Violence Division. If you're interested in practicing in these courts and you have never seen inside, you've never met any of those judges, these are fantastic resources to get you connected to those courts. Then we have our managing student debt. So if you are currently a student and you are hoping to continue to learn more about how you can manage debt after you graduate, our managing student debt discussion is virtual on July 16th. You can learn more following the link in the chat or by going to our upcoming events section on our website. With all of that being said, welcome to Fellowships 101. We are so excited to have you all here today. And I am going to turn it over to Jennie Netburn, who is with Georgetown University Law Center, to get us started.
Hi, everyone. As Chris said, I'm Jennie Netburn, and I'm very happy to be here. I attended this session when I was a law school intern and found it incredibly helpful. And so the benefits, it was in person, the benefits of it being on Zoom is we get to pull on folks from all over. So as Chris said, I'm from Georgetown Law School. I work in their public sector career counseling office. And I'm going to be the question asker tonight before we open it up to the audience. And we have lots of questions. I'm going to start by asking the 2 fellows on this Zoom, first Zakiya and then Lee, to give us an introduction, a description of your project, your host, where you went to law school, which fellowship program you're part of, and what year of it you're in, your first or your second. So I'll start with Zakiya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zakiya Lewis. I graduated NYU Law School last year, and I currently work at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law in DC. I'm a Skadden Fellow, and it's my first year in my project. My project is working to challenge anti-CRT, anti-DEI legislation and kind of political movement that we're seeing across the country, really focusing on low-income Black and Brown students, and particularly Black and Brown queer students who are most at risk for the harms that these bills usher in. And so I'm currently working at the Educational Opportunities Project at the Lawyers Committee and bringing suits against states, as well as working on some more I guess, less lawyerly and more advocacy projects as we investigate in different states where we're seeing these kinds of pushes. So that's me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Tremblay. I graduated from Georgetown Law last year. So I'm just finishing up my first year as a Justice Catalyst Fellow in Idaho. My host organization is Legal Voice, and the project is about restoring access to reproductive health care in the state of Idaho. There's a bunch of different components, but the main focus is impact litigation with some additional know your rights trainings and sort of community work sprinkled in. And I think that's everything that you asked, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen and then Jessica to describe your work and some more information about your fellowship programs.
Thank you. And as both Chris and Jenny said, really excited for your questions today, and thank you for taking the time. So my name is Kathleen Rubenstein. I run the Skadden Foundation, which is the fellowship that Zakiya has. I also had the good fortune of being a Skadden Fellow at the beginning of my career. So in addition to selecting our classes of fellows, I also support the community of former fellows who are public interest practitioners. Our fellowship program is a little bit on the small side. We have 28 fellows a class. You'll also get to hear from the folks at Equal Justice Works who have a larger program. And this will be our 37th class of fellows. So we will be selecting our 1000th fellow, and we do have former fellows practicing public interest law in 44 states in the District of Columbia. So it's a really vibrant community, and excited to talk about that path with you.
Hi all, I'm Jessica Ryckman. I'm the Director of Fellowships at Equal Justice Works. As Kathleen mentioned, we are also a postgraduate legal fellowship program that looks to place lawyers in at-need communities working on innovative projects around the country. So we have over 200 fellows around the working right now, and we are gosh, I actually don't have that number. I should know how many states, but I know that we've had folks in all 50 states and in Puerto Rico. So very excited about that, and always look forward to hearing from people who would like to propose a project in any of those states. We have more than 2,700 alumni spread also around the country, and really excited to also discuss with you the fellowship process, but also what comes from that perhaps afterwards as we discuss a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you both. Lee, can you describe the Justice Catalyst program a little bit and maybe how it is a bit distinct from Equal Justice Works and the Skadden Fellowship program?
Absolutely. So Justice Catalyst is small. There's usually around a dozen fellows per class. And unlike, I think, both Skadden and Equal Justice, it is very focused on impact litigation and systemic change. So that's not to say that you have to have an impact litigation project, but Justice Catalyst is really looking for folks who are trying to make a difference on a system as a whole, and who have a really creative, innovative way of applying the law in order to do that. So systemic change and projects that are non-traditional are more of Justice Catalyst's focus. And they're pretty open to any type of host organization, including non-legal orgs, non-profit orgs, folks who don't even have an attorney on staff, which is, I think, unique as well. Yeah, I think that about covers it. I'm happy to answer more questions on that later.
Thank you. So for the fellows, Zakiya and then Lee, how did you make the decision to apply for a project fellowship in the first place? And what do you feel like you have uniquely gained as a fellow? Zakiya, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to get into public interest law, and I knew that fellowships are one of the best ways to do that. I had been hearing about the fellowship process since I applied to law school. And so I honestly thought it was like a very natural progression. I just thought that's what you did throughout a year if you want to do public interest stuff, not necessarily going into public defense work. So that's kind of just why I decided to apply. And can you remind me of the other question you asked, Jenny? Sorry.
No problem. What do you feel like you have uniquely gained as a fellow?
Yeah. And I'm really glad I did, because I personally really enjoy the dual life of an attorney fellow, I guess. It's nice being a part of a public interest organization. It's nice seeing people who've been doing this work for years, even decades at times, and kind of learning from that institutional memory. But it's also really nice to have a cohort feel. I think that we're all used to that feeling, just having been through school so many times. And so it's been really nice to like just have a cohort of people that I know are also new, are also learning, are also kind of finding their way in this field. And so the community of Skadden Fellows that I've been connected with has really been just part of what I really enjoy about the fellowship structure. And also just kind of having someone else or something else to lean on besides my team, maybe, or my supervisor, or even my organization. But I know that if I have a question or concern or just want to talk about things, I can always talk to Kathleen or any of my other Skadden Fellows, be they current fellows who are in my class, fellows who are finishing up their fellowship this year, or even fellows that I would have met last year at our symposium who've now finished their fellowships and have moved on to other things. And so that community is one that really, for me personally, feels like a very big gain from this process.
And then I would say for me, I am a little bit the opposite. I didn't know fellowships existed until I got to 2L. And fortunately, there were kind folks at Georgetown who informed me that that is a thing. And I really wanted to be a fellow because Legal Voice is basically the only organization in the Pacific Northwest doing what they do. And it was exactly what I came to law school to do. So I knew that I really wanted to work for this organization specifically, but typically they hire attorneys with at least 5 years of experience. They're a really small org. There are 12 employees. So I would say that the answer sort of to the second part of the question, which is what I've gained, is also that I get to work for this organization that has really incredibly experienced attorneys and that normally wouldn't have a brand new attorney doing the kind of work that I'm doing. I got to co-write a Supreme Court amicus, which is an absolutely wild thing to say less than a year out of law school. And I'm getting to take point on litigation in ways that I think would not be expected in most organizations, much less a big law firm, which is really exciting. And I also have, the supervision and the support of the organization to do that. So it's a really unique experience and it's been really incredible.
Thank you both. And we'll get into a little later sort of the fellowship communities at these different places. So Jessica, can you talk about how, I'm sorry, my dog is making some noise. Can you talk about how your organization finds the funding and solicits application for each type of EJW fellowship?
Absolutely. And I'm sure you'll hear my dog shortly, so no worries there. So yeah, I'm actually gonna, if it's okay, take the second part of that question first. So how do we solicit applications? So we have two different fellowship programs. The one that I will talk about first is called our Design Your Own Fellowship Program. And how do we solicit applications for that? I will say the applications are open on the website. So I will drop a link in the chat. What we're looking for there is we're looking for people who are passionate about serving the underserved, serving communities that otherwise would not have access to justice, or reaching or trying to work on a legal need that otherwise would not be served without the fellowship. So in terms of the recruitment, we look for projects in, again, as I mentioned, all 50 states and the territories. We are looking for committed, innovative people who really want to come in and work with the communities that have need of access to justice. So I would strongly suggest to go look at the application because it's really broad. We take all issue areas. We have projects that focus in on direct services, impact litigation, policy work, advocacy, community education. You have the ability to craft the solution to the problem you present. So please, think broadly, think creatively. So I will, like I said, I'll drop that link in the chat and go check that out. So for our funding, so one big question we get from fellow candidates often is, oh, do I have to go find my own funding? And the answer is no, we do that part. So we solicit funding from corporations, major law firms, foundations, and private individuals, and they sponsor fellowships. So that's a big part of what we do. We have many of our fellows have close relationships with their sponsors because they can offer pro bono engagement to help multiply the impact of the project that's being proposed. Or they can sometimes just be a mentor if it's an individual sponsor, for example. So we individually recruit all of these sponsors for anywhere from 75 to 85 about people for each fellowship class. And but I just want to reiterate, that's on us. And then throughout the selection process, you would have a chance to interview with us and also meet some of those potential sponsors. That's how that works. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Next question is, what makes a successful host organization? And we'll start with Kathleen and then go to Jessica if you have anything different, Jessica.
Absolutely. So I'll start by saying that for the most part, folks can apply to and do apply to like many different fellowship funders, all three of these. It's super common. And for the most part, a host would be eligible to apply to all of them, and you would be eligible to apply to all of them. There are little contour differences, but they're modest. So you're planning this out with all of these in mind in the main. So for Skadden, a host has to have at least 2 attorneys whose full-time work is civil legal advocacy who can supervise your project. We take supervision really seriously because we see the first few years of your legal career as an apprenticeship period. So what makes a successful host in the application process is the same thing that makes a successful host as your employer early in your career, which is they have an excellent track record of client representation. Like they do something really, really well. That's either what you're going to do or close. They also have an excellent track record of growing the skills of starting attorneys. It takes a lot of supervision and commitment, and you want to make sure that that is a skill set that your host organization brings, that it is a healthy and functional organization. And then the third is really applying those two to that work that is your dream job. You need to find the host that is as all in on the project that you want to do as you are. And that's because when the work is really busy, and even when there's sort of the normal amount of personnel changes over the course of 3 years, right? Because you're applying at the very beginning of 3L year, you don't start for a year, and then a Skadden Fellowship or an Equal Justice Works Fellowship is a full 2 years. You want to make sure that there's that steadfast commitment to the clients that you've contemplated. Your host will even need to remain committed to those clients after your fellowship funding ends. So you want to find a host that's excellent at the lawyering, excellent at the developing the skills of starting lawyers, and is really committed to the thing that you all dream up together because they know that it matters for the clients that they're committed to. You can see that actually picking the host is a very important part of this process because they're going to contribute a great deal to you in terms of the insights about the precise contours of what would be effective work in the areas that you're passionate about.
It's always hard to follow Kathleen. She said a lot of what I wanted to say, but much more eloquently than I was going to. I would add one thing to that, and I think a great host organization is a host organization that is very open and works with fellows before they've even submitted the application in a way that is fair and open around parts of the employment agreement. So I just would caution those who are thinking about looking at fellowships, you've got to have these conversations with your host organization, and it's very exciting to talk about the work and the project, their connections to the community, your connections to the community, and how you're going to work together. But don't forget they're going to be your employer for 2 years. So we find the strongest host organizations are those that are very upfront about what the salary will be. Will you, if they have a union, are you eligible to join the union as a fellow? What are the health benefits? What are all of the different pieces of the package that make up your employee-employer relationship for the first for your 2 years of your fellowship? So I would just add that to Kathleen's excellent points.
Yeah, I'm going to add one little detail about the EJW one because this came up for us, which is that EJW requires their fellows to be paid the same as someone who is similarly situated at the host organization, but the contribution from EJW is the same. So sometimes hosts need to commit to paying the difference between the EJW contribution and the salary that you would be required to get. And without that, I've been told by EJW, you are not eligible. So that's a very important conversation to have with your host. I'm letting you know all these fellowship websites are fantastic. So but use them because the information is there. And, of course, we're not going to cover every detail, but it's there on the website. Okay, so to the next question, we'll start with Jessica and then go to Kathleen. I'm wondering if you can give us some insights on the type of projects that you fund generally, and also what types of projects you don't fund.
Absolutely. So I'll just start with the easier one, which is what we don't fund. So we don't fund what we call standard criminal defense. So that's defense, criminal defense at the trial stage, although several of our fellows do work on post-conviction defense work. We also don't fund projects that are focused on international law. It needs to be focused on the access to justice needs in the United States and territory. So that's what we don't fund. What we do fund is almost anything else. We have folks working in more than 35 different issue areas. So it goes everywhere from voting rights, immigration, reentry work, special education. I mean, really the gamut. And I will, again, as soon as I'm done speaking, drop a link in the chat to the Meet the Fellows page where you can take a look and you can sort it by issue area or location or host organization and see what all the fellows are doing. The majority of our projects, and I use that term accurately, but a little bit loosely, do have a direct service component, but several of our projects that we fund do not. So there are a lot of projects that are looking into, again, impact litigation, community education and advocacy, and most of our projects have multi-prongs. So, there will be direct advocacy component. There will also be perhaps a litigation or a community education component, different kinds of different aspects, because again, you get to design the solution to the problem you've identified. So yeah, lots of different areas to think about. We call it the design your dream job, design your own fellowship. What needs you've seen through your lived experience or through your work in law school. Tell us how you're going to solve that problem. That's what we're really looking for.
Okay, that's wonderful. So Skadden is just a little bit narrower. So we fund the unmet civil legal needs of people living in poverty in the US. So the biggest one is that your clients have to be poor, but we don't have a strict definition. So many, I would say again, most of our host organizations are screening all of their clients based on income anyway. They're legal services, corporation funded organizations, or similar. And of course, if you're working in San Francisco on housing or in New York City, we understand that perhaps the right income threshold for your project might be higher than it is somewhere else. So we want you to bring to us what the right threshold is. It's also possible to do work at an organization or on an issue where the clients aren't screened for income, including like Zakiya's. But we don't fund projects that just generally might inure to the benefit of poor people. The vast majority of poor people's legal needs are not met in this country. And so we do fund projects that are targeted at and accountable to poor clients. And that means that there's a really great, meaningful public interest work in environmental or voting or reproductive rights that is outside of what we would fund. And there's meaningful work that is targeted in a way that makes it eligible for us. So I would also say the vast majority of our fellows are meeting legal needs of a lot of clients, individually or strategically, and sometimes at the impact level. And just like Jessica said, you can look on our website and you will see that projects might include a couple prongs. The reason that those prongs are there is because those are the right ones to fix the problem in that community. If you want to combine elements of different styles of advocacy, then you need to make sure that they're within your skill set and interests, and also within your host's ability to supervise. So sometimes we'll fund multiple projects on the same topic, and they won't share any tools at all. And that could be because the status of the need in an area is different and the type of host is different. And so the tools available are different. When you come to us in September of 3L year, you've done a great deal of listening and learning, and you're really insightful, not just about the nature of the problem that your clients are experiencing, but which tools will be most useful in addressing those problems.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to pivot to our fellows. And the question is, if you can help explain the process for finding your host organization or for approaching your host organization if you were already familiar with them about applying for a project fellowship, and then what it was like working with them on the application and sort of development of the project. We're going to start with Lee.
Sure. I am from the Seattle area, and I knew that I wanted to be back in the Pacific Northwest after law school. And like I said, Legal Voice is, I think our motto is gender justice. So it's an organization that focuses on all issues pertaining to gender, which was what I knew I wanted to work on. And so I applied to intern for Legal Voice twice. And I was not able to intern for them either of my 2 summers because their response schedule was much slower than a lot of other public interest orgs. So I was hearing back from other folks first. So I basically banged down the door and I kept emailing them and asking if there was any way that I could get involved, if I could do some pro bono hours, because I really wanted to work for them after I graduated. Unfortunately, they did give me a couple of different pro bono projects my 2L summer. And from there, we decided together that we were interested in applying for a fellowship. Unfortunately, the executive director was actually ill just as we started the application process. So it was a bit bumpy for us specifically because she was the point person who I had worked with on all of the pro bono projects. But we transitioned. I worked with different members of the shared leadership team at the org. And we kind of collaboratively came up with the project idea, which was to try to fix some things in Idaho, because Idaho is a state that is in many ways a lot like the Deep South. And because my particular interest was reproductive health as it pertained to disability, and we saw some openings in the state laws here that we thought could potentially capture both of those things and make Idaho a little bit better for everyone. That's the hope anyway. That's the optimism. So yeah, I think for me, it was a very smooth process because I knew exactly what I wanted the whole way through. But I know that that's not true for everyone. So if you're thinking to yourself that you have no idea who you would like to work for, that's totally fine. You do not have to do it my way to do it the right way.
Yeah, and just as an example of that, I would be a person who didn't know who I wanted to work with. I knew, like I said, that I wanted to work in public interest. I knew I wanted to apply for a fellowship. I had an idea of some projects that were interesting to me, but I wasn't sold on any particular or wedded rather to any particular organization or project at the time. And so I would have started my application journey by going on PJSD and kind of other sites and looking at organizations that were soliciting applications for sponsorship for project fellowships. So I applied to a couple organizations, some of which wanted you to come with a project that you had designed, and some of which had their own projects that they were looking for a fellow to apply to these fellowship orgs with. And so Lawyers Committee was just another organization that was searching for a fellow for sponsorship. I came with my particular project, and we agreed that I would apply for the Skadden Fellowship, which I'm very glad that we did. And they helped me refine my project and my applications specifically for the Skadden Fellowship. And so my experience was really, I would say, impacted by the fact that there was another Skadden Fellow at my organization who was in their who had just completed their completed their second year of their fellowship. And so they were extremely helpful with me and very, very, very hands-on. I can't necessarily say what the experience would have been like without them, because they were really my point person at the organization. They read through several iterations of my application, of my project, of my essay answers, and so on, really right down to the wire of the deadline to apply. And so they're really helpful in that way. So my org had already had Skadden Fellows before, had one currently working there, and that would have been a very big assistance to me. But unlikely, I did not have a particular org that I was rooting for, but really just looking to enter into the field in a way that I knew would be beneficial to me moving forward, and it really worked out in the end.
Thank you. Okay, so my next question is whether Kathleen and then Jessica, if you have anything to add from the employer funder side. I know you spoke a little bit about what makes, a strong host organization, and so if you can expand on that.
Sure. So there are absolutely nonprofits that are really familiar with our programs that do this every year. Some of them do post affirmatively, and you can even start to see those now. So we'll talk about timeline. I'm so pleased that you're thinking about this right now. It's perfect. There are also fantastic organizations that we won't hear from in any year unless just the right thing actually comes to them. Where they see that they can make a difference in the issues that they really care about. So there are orgs we hear from a lot, like Zakiya's, and there are orgs that are new that we don't hear from a lot, like Lee's, and those are both totally fine. It is important to just be mindful that if your organization is less familiar with this process, then you're going to need to make sure that you're developing that kitchen cabinet of folks who can help you think through the details and the overall approach to the project from outside of just the host. This is the same thing at law schools. There are law schools that have a lot of public interest resources. That's fantastic. Make sure you're talking to them. It's literally their job to be useful. And there are also law schools that don't have that infrastructure. That's okay too. Again, you're the one driving, so you get to decide, who it is that you can bring in to make sure that you have a set of wise voices around you. So don't be shy about reaching out to organizations that you respect. That's what I did. I also had not been at my org, but my org also wasn't going to apply otherwise, right? It worked out that we connected. And I would say organizations should be very happy to receive this outreach, because you are bringing the resources of the funder. And so if they're too busy to engage with your email, that's actually a really great sign that it's not that kind of employer that is going to work to be the supervisor for those 2 years. So don't be shy about reaching out. You're really offering them something super important. Yes, and the current fellows, all of these folks are grateful for what they've had and also really passionate about folks' legal needs being met. And so they're going to be really happy to talk with you. Our fellows, EJW's fellows for sure as well.
Yeah, just seconding that. I did put in the chat the Meet the Fellows page for EJW, and you can search by host organization or by issue area and location. So if you're I want to do a project focused on special education in Chicago, you can see who's done that recently and maybe where they've been, which is also a good resource. And you can feel free to reach out to those folks, and hopefully they're able to connect with you. I know many of our alumni do connect with even cold outreach. That's great. And as Kathleen said, reach out to your law school. And then we also have for EJW, we're setting up this summer a series of office hours as well. So those will be posted shortly on the website. So you can reach out with specific questions about that, general advice on how to find a host organization.
Thanks. I want to ask a more specific follow-up question, because I get this from a lot of students, which is, let's say a student is deciding between a host that has had several fellows and a host that would be new to hosting a fellow. Can you talk about how that student could think through the decision of which host to partner with, all else being equal? Jessica, we could start with you.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, because we, of course, have host organizations that have hosted fellows and we have great relationships with, but we are always looking to support new host organizations as well, host organizations that are new to us. So I do think that it's really important to find the organization that's the right fit for you and your project, whether they're an experienced host organization or they are a new host organization for us or for any fellowship program. And our application gives a lot of space to talk about the organization and have the organization explain how they're going to support the fellow in the project. So just, we have a sample one up on the website. Please go take a look at it, you know, and reach out to us if you're like, hey, is this, we don't review individual language, but if you've got queries or questions about whether or not a host organization, you think is being presented in a way that would be, helpful to the application, we're happy to help.
Yeah, that's great advice. You want to develop into a really client-centered, client-directed lawyer. So you just ask questions about at the end of this fellowship 3 years from now, where are these clients that you're contemplating going to have had the most transformational experience and support? And then when you figure out where the best place is to do the work, the application is your opportunity to explain why. I think that you just want to think about different organizations, just like different project components, as bringing their own challenges to navigate. It might take a little bit more time with an organization that hasn't done this before. You might have to support them more in writing that host commitment letter because it's going to be new to them. That's not a good or a bad thing. It'll actually probably be a learning experience for you, as long as it's not late August, right? So by thinking through these things now, again, you get to be in the driver's seat and you get to make the client-centered decision because you're not jammed up.
Great, thank you. Okay, so what is the ideal timing on when to start? We've hinted at this, and this is for everybody. So I'll start with Jessica, and then if folks have something to add, feel free to add it or feel free to pass.
Absolutely. So I would say, you know, a great time to start would be as early as your 1L year to think about where you're going to be during the summer. Where are you going to perhaps spend your summers or your during the school year semester internships or externships, finding organizations that might be a good fit. That said, many of our successful applicants and successful fellowships are folks who hadn't worked with the organization previously. So I don't say that to be intimidating, but in case there's folks who are earlier in the process, it's a great opportunity to just be thinking ahead to how you might use the summers and the internships or externships or clinics to develop those relationships for potential host organizations and to outline what you think would be a good project. So I would say if you are, for example, a rising 3L and you're starting right now, that's great. That's great. I think what's important is to start sooner rather than later on the application itself. For us, like I said, it's posted. I believe Kathleen, yours is up as well. Lee, I would think Justice Catalyst, I know is a little bit of a different process, but go look at what's required and just start having those conversations. Hopefully you are investigating this because you do know of a community or a cause or a need that you'd like to address, and you can start right there. So I would say the time is now to start marshaling those resources and especially reaching out to your law school professionals if you have one that's able to assist. I'm sure that hopefully finals are done for most folks and they've got a little bit of time right now to help advise you as well.
Does anyone else have anything to add on that?
I'll just add a beat. I was not in the Zakiya knew about this before law school or that Jessica was thinking about this 1L year. Those would have been great. The reason actually I asked Chris to move the panel forward is because I think this is a great time to be starting and there aren't a ton of great times after right now. June is a fantastic time. You need to be doing two things and maybe two things at once. One is these real questions about what your dream job is. Nobody's going to know for you if there's, a jurisdiction that you care the most about or clients that you came to law school to serve. You need to get clear on a couple core commitments, not necessarily the precise contours of a project, but those parameters that make a search possible. And then you need to get clear on target host organizations. And the outreach there can be straightforward, right? Certainly if you know the organization, but even if you don't, it's just a straightforward email. Getting that all in June is what you want because you actually want to be locking in your host organization conceivably in June, quite possibly in July. But what you need to be doing is having those rich learning conversations, that opportunity to get really insightful through potential hosts and offerers. Over the course of the whole summer. And then you'll come to us that much the wiser and your application that much the cleaner and more polished and well thought out. So June is fantastic. And so tomorrow is a good time to start.
I'll just add that if this sounds scary, because I remember attending this event when I was a 2L and I was intimidated, you probably already started in some way. At probably some point during law school, there's been a case that has really irritated you and you've thought, why is the law like this? And there's probably issue areas that you've already at some point thought, I would like this to change. And if not, then there might be an issue area that you're at least curious about or interested in. So you're already doing some of the hardest parts by being in law school. And don't panic if it feels like a lot to cover all of a sudden.
Thank you. So the next question is, what does the actual application look like? Having power cord issues, so I'm going to plug in here, but we will start with Lee, so you can talk about Justice Catalyst.
Sure. Justice Catalyst has a bit of a different process. You can submit a prospectus. You don't have to, but it's sort of like a pre-application application, a first pass, where Justice Catalyst will provide feedback on your project. And that due date is around September, October. So they get that feedback back to you within about a month or two. And it's a really great opportunity if you can get that application done in time, because you'll get a really good sense of what you're missing, what they're looking for, what questions they have, and how to improve your application for them. And then the full application is due October 15th to December 1st. That's like the open window. So December 1st being the drop dead deadline. And then you wait, which I'm sure will be a theme for Zakiya and Kathleen and Jessica, is at least from our end as the potential fellows, you just sort of have to sit there and hope that you get an interview. Interviews typically happen early spring. Justice Catalyst is small. There are 3 staff members full-time, so you'll interview with one of them, often with the executive director. And then you do some more waiting, and you hope that they find a match for you. And they typically get back to you about that by the end of April. I did not actually find out until May that I was going to be a Justice Catalyst fellow, so it can really get drawn out. And that, if that sounds scary, I understand not knowing if you're going to be employed or not it's really difficult. But if you can hang in there, again, the fellowship has been amazing. And these folks are working really hard to find you the funding because, as I think Christina put in the chat, they really do want you to succeed.
Thank you. Kathleen, do you want to talk about the Skadden application?
Sure. So our application and EJWs, if you're doing design your own, are due in early September. And so do be mindful that you're writing these 2 different documents, right? Do your project planning. Our process moves really quickly because we're a little bit smaller. So we receive all the applications the first week in September. We review every single one of them. I review every single one of them. And then I share the ones that I would love to sit down with a group of advisory committee. Our advisory committee are partners at the firm's various offices. They all serve on pro bono committees and do pro bono, often with the fellows. They all are on nonprofit boards, and they're all really committed to the foundation. And together we identify about 100 folks that we're going to interview. Those interviews also happen right then in late September and the first 2 weeks of October. And again, I'm in every interview, as is one of the members of the advisory committee. This year we'll be interviewing in person, which is what we did for 32 years, and then had to pause. Of course, there will be a remote option if it would be a hardship to interview in person, but we do arrange your travel. If you're not in one of the cities where I'll be interviewing, I'll do interviews in DC, Boston, Chicago, New York, Palo Alto, and Los Angeles, so probably close to you. And if you're in one of those cities, that's where we'll meet. And then we let you know at the various cut points if we're able to proceed or not. So whether or not you're receiving an interview, everyone will find out the same day. And then again, at the conclusion of the interviews, whether you're a finalist or not. And then you do have to wait. I remember it feeling long. now that I am a part of the process, it does not feel long at all to prepare for the final step, which is we have an independent board of selection trustees, and they come to New York and make the decision in mid-November, and I let all the finalists know if they've been selected for a fellowship or not. And that way people can move forward. If it's not with Skadden, you'll know that by mid-November. And and to Lee's point, you're welcome to reach out to me over the summer. I talk to probably most applicants. It's not evaluative, but if it's useful, I'm always happy to let folks know if I have any questions or concerns as you're developing your project. And also I'll put you in touch with the folks in my kitchen cabinet who are expert in your issue, who are the fellows in that area.
Thank you. Zakiya, anything you want to add as you went through the Skadden application process?
I think Kathleen really covered it, but I would just really emphasize how hands-on the process was. I remember speaking to Kathleen that summer about my project before I submitted my application. I felt a little bit intimidated because I thought it was strange that people were encouraging me to chat with the executive director about my random thoughts about things that I might want to do. But it was really a very helpful conversation. And it really, I think, emphasizes the fact that Skadden wants you to do well, and they want to fund your project, so they want to help you write the best project proposal that you can to be competitive in that process. So I would just really encourage people to reach out, whether you're applying for Skadden, EJW, or Justice Catalyst, to really reach out to fellows, to anyone who offers themselves up to help you refine your project. Because for me, that was the most scary part, was having to come with an idea on my own, but you're not really doing it on your own. So make sure that you are leaning into the help that is offered.
Thank you. And Jessica, can you talk about the EJW application and specifically how it's different from these other applications, if you're familiar with these other applications?
Absolutely. There's a lot of similarities. So I would say they're more similar than different. But the EJW application, we think of it a little bit as a business plan. So you're identifying, you have a problem statement. Why do you want to do this project? You identify your objectives and your timeline. There's a personal statement and some information about your host organization as well. So, it's online. We've got a system you can get on now, like I said, and check off the questions. And there's a Word document you can download with those questions if you just want to see what it looks like. But again, I don't think it'll feel unfamiliar if you've checked out Skadden before, or even some of the Justice Catalyst, although like I said, the actual process is a little bit different there. And then applications are due, like I said, for us on September 12th at midnight. We get a lot of applications in the 11 o'clock hour that evening. Please try to submit early in case there are technical challenges. And then our alumni actually, amazingly, are issue area experts in all of those different issue areas, and they volunteer to review those applications. So we have 3 alumni review every application and help give us feedback on the legal mechanisms proposed and the strength of the application. After we start our interviews in late November, and it does go through this year, we had a lot of amazing applications, and we selected our last few fellows in early May, but we try not to do that whenever possible because we know that that makes it really hard to plan. So hopefully we'll be wrapping up the process a little bit earlier, but it's always so hard to turn these wonderful folks down. So we do try to fund as many great applications as we can. So that's a little bit about our timeline.
And can I just say, in case this isn't clear to you, right? You're going to interview with one EJW sponsor, and if it doesn't work out for you, you have a really good chance of interviewing with another, and you're always learning, right? You'll learn from interviewing with me, you'll learn from sitting down with that first set of sponsors, and that's why you do, of course, also want to lean in, like Zakiya said, to the supports around you to prepare for your interviews, because it's important, but you will continue to grow in this skill as well.
And thank you real quick. I want to follow up with that to Kathleen for raising highlights of the program that I did not. We also provide you with some interview guidance before you start, and provide you with feedback after your interviews before you get another interview if you request it. And we volunteer it because we do want you to have the best chance of success. So we are there trying to support you as folks, and as Kathleen and others are as well. We do want you to succeed.
Thank you. So next question is for Kathleen and then Jessica. What are some common mistakes on applications and during the interview, and what makes for a strong application and interview?
That's a compound question, dear. Okay, I'll take a few. I think you want to think about the period of refining your written materials. And what can be different about this creating a business plan or working as a group thing is this is not like a law school paper that you can do alone and late. So when an application, when people have really spent the time working together, you can see that so well, that the plan is really, really solid. It's really client-centered. It is serious, right? Because our clients' needs are serious. And that means that the application is clean of typos, is easy to follow, is compelling and demonstrates why this is someone's dream job. And it's not rushed. So one thing I think can be, of course, like whatever, you're going to look at it a lot of times, other people are going to help you look at it so that it is clean and professional as lawyerly submissions should be. We will not cut your application because there are typos, but you will get a call from a colleague of mine asking you to fix something and you will be embarrassed. So let's like not do that. But the bigger thing I think is the conceptual version of the same thing, which is when you sit down to write your first description of the project. Ours is only 400 words, and it is a lawyering skill to get down what you're going to do and why it matters in a tight space. Every year, I'll see people where it feels like a first draft. There are like 300 words on the nature of the problem, which is really important, but they've left themselves too little space to convey what they're going to do, much less any confidence that it makes sense. And then there are other folks who, there's acronyms and it's really, really deep in the weeds and it's hard to follow. And if you've lost me, that's not a good sign, right? I'm a public interest generalist. You absolutely know more about your topic of passion than I do, but like, I'm a public interest lawyer. I should be able to follow your writing. And so I think that just takes time and refinement and maybe a couple different perspectives. And so I'd encourage you to, although the most important things are the listening and the learning and the designing, don't neglect the writing and also just the space to continue to hone your craft.
Happy to jump in on strong proposal. I think one thing we really look for is the right person with the right organization at the right time, like the fit of an application. And just, I know this sounds general, but it really comes through in your personal statement and where you talk about why you chose your host organization, when you talk about what other work the organization is doing in the community or who the other community partners are. I think it's just really important to say why you're going to have an impact. I mean, ultimately, we're very invested in our fellows, but we're very invested in the impact they have in the communities they serve. So tell us why you. Seconding what Kathleen said, please proofread for typos and things like that. It's very distracting, and you just don't want to lose someone on something that you can fix with that. So I would say that those are really the things you want to do, and to the extent you can blend data and personal stories, that just helps bring your proposal to life off the page. We do read almost 400 of these. I don't read all of them personally like Kathleen does, but we have a team that reads them. And to the extent you can tell the narrative that helps us understand what you're proposing in a way that helps it stand out, that's also really helpful.
Thank you. Oh, Kathleen.
Jennie, I neglected the interview, and the same insights are true there as well. This is supposed to be your dream job. You're supposed to be excited about it. These interviews are all relatively brief, and you will be given the floor. You should come into an interview with a lot of confidence. You wouldn't be afforded an interview if we weren't confident in you and your host and your plans, right? We think it's solid and we're excited to hear more. And so you should come into the interview, again, this is a lawyering skill, with a goal of what it is that you want the interviewers to take away. And every once in a while, I do meet folks who it's much more reiterating what we've already read. They don't have any goals for our time together. Or I can tell that they come in actually really with like a weight that they think will be skeptical. We won't care about folks who are re-entering, even though we've been funding that for 37 years, or we won't care about them because of the law school that they went to, even though they might not know this, but like I've never seen another application from that law school and I'm thrilled to sit down with them. And so I just want you to come into that process. Again, you're the boss of this process and you want to come into that interview well prepared and confident and excited.
Can I add one thing too? We do our interviews remotely. We do them via Zoom. We're not moving back to in person as much as we would love to be able to meet all of these wonderful candidates. One thing I would just add is that sometimes commitment and energy are a little bit harder to transmit via Zoom. So I would just recommend that to the extent you get to an interview, that's one thing. We're not asking you, you don't have to be the most outgoing or passionate. This isn't a personality test, but you are a lawyer advocating for your project. And so just bringing that commitment and making it apparent to the people who are on the other side of the screen, I think is pretty important. And just, again, it's a professional development skill that you'll need because we do a lot of things via Zoom still. So flagging that.
Thank you. So being cognizant of time here, I'm going to wrap it up with one more question that I'm going to put to Zakiya, then Lee, then Jessica to cover all of our fellowship programs. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the fellowship community and sort of specifically like what opportunities are there for gathering? Is it in person? Is it online? And then how are you communicating with the other fellows? So Zakiya, I'll start with you, then Lee, then Jessica.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I particularly enjoy the Skadden community and the community of fellows. And I think that, again, that feeling would have already been like precipitated, I guess, by the assistance that the previous Skadden fellow at my organization had done. So I was very excited to meet them at the symposium. So that is an in-person event that Skadden has every year, including the year that you're admitted to the program. So before I started my fellowship, while I was still in law school last April, I attended the symposium where all of the fellows who were admitted this year, who are completing their first year and completing their second year, are also present. And so that happens every year. So that's 3 in-person opportunities to engage with all the fellows in your own cohort and fellows in other cohorts as well, below and above you. And so that was a really great opportunity to meet fellows, to meet Kathleen, to meet everyone else involved in the organization. And they say to block it off early on. So most people are there in person, which is great. And I think that's where we really would have met all of the new fellows, kind of made those initial connections. They have affinity groups as well throughout the weekend of events. And so that also helped to kind of make for smaller groups to make more connections. Communicating, I would say, post symposium is really fellow led. And so as a result, or rather part of those affinity groups, particularly, most people would have set up like a Slack or like some sort of group message and so on, because there are small groups. And so that's kind of the main way. We also do have a fellow-wide or cohort-wide rather Slack as well, which people are not as active on as they are when we're in person, but I think that's just the nature of life and being working adults now, unfortunately. But in general, there's plenty of opportunities to meet people in person, like I said, at least each year. Kathleen also moves around the country quite a bit and will let people know when she's in different cities for dinners or just chats and so on, to bring people together as well. Sometimes old and new fellows, which is cool. And so that would be kind of how the community, I would say, for the Skadden is kind of oriented. And some of those connections that I've made at the symposium are more individual. And so someone works at the ACLU across the street from me. So we're really working hard to find the time to get drinks. That have not been successful yet, but we do communicate. So that's what that looks like there. The small cohort definitely helps to kind of make those kind of intense connections over the course of the symposiums that you attend.
Lee.
Struggling to unmute myself. Yeah, so like I said, Justice Catalyst is a really small group. And we have both a group-wide listserv and then a Justice Catalyst wide listserv. So both classes of fellows can either talk to each other or to the whole crowd together. And that's been really helpful for actually both socializing and work reasons, because we're all pretty isolated. We tend to get really embedded in our communities. And so when I ended up writing the amicus brief that I mentioned earlier, I was trying to do outreach to folks in the Deep South, and I'm in Idaho. So I really have no connections that are interested in repro health in Texas or Tennessee, but there are other fellows who are working in those communities who know the folks at the orgs there to talk to. And so all I really had to do was send out an email, and I got back, dozens of different emails to just say, hey, this fellow sent me and said that you'd be willing to chat. And that was enormously helpful. Separately, Justice Catalyst also does a really great job of setting up remote social opportunities. So we have an ongoing book club that meets once a month. And we all get to collectively vote on what we want the book to be. Sometimes it's a movie, sometimes it's a series of papers. And then Justice Catalyst will send you whatever it is by mail, and then you all read it and convene and discuss. And then there's also, I think almost every month, a guest speaker who comes to talk about the public interest work that they do. And all of those folks have been really unique among lawyers. I think in law school, you get the opportunity to talk to a lot of different professionals. And yet I am constantly surprised by what people are doing with the law and the ways that they are practicing law. So those are always really exciting and really fun. And you get to see, your whole cohort is there on Zoom, and everybody's asking really smart questions and making, righteous complaints about the state of the law and how can we fix it. And it's really great to be in that space together, because I think the project can get long and difficult, especially if you're working in a community that is, hostile to your project, which I think in many ways a lot of Idaho is hostile to mine. Yeah, it's been fantastic, is what I would say.
Well, I love the book club idea. We might have to bring that over to EJW. Fantastic. So our fellows have a few different opportunities. So we have our leadership development training in DC each fall. And so that's an opportunity where all fellows come in person. So that's fellows who have just started their fellowship in their second year, and also in our cohort program, which is modeled a little differently, but also newer public interest lawyers. So about 250 fellows get together for that. So that's twice in the course of your fellowship. We also have a year-round learning and networking program. And so there's virtual sessions, one a month on different topics. So for example, we've had PSLF experts. I know that's very relevant to many folks, even on this call right now, come and speak, or maybe on a substantive area of the law, trauma-informed lawyer. It could be on different topics as we talk to the fellows and gather their interest, or areas that they say that they would like to hear more about. And then we also do a series of regional meetups. So the Design Your Own Fellowship team is around the country. So we've got someone in LA, someone in New York, someone in Chicago, someone who's part-time in Atlanta, and they also travel a lot. So that is in addition to our other folks. Whenever we're out on the road, which is quite frequently, we do try to do a fellow meetup to try to make sure everyone gets at least a couple of opportunities to attend those local gatherings with whomever might be there. And if it's a smaller group, we also tend to invite the alumni, and in an informal way. And if it's, say, New York, we tend to do separate, like, here's fellow and alumni gatherings, so that you have an opportunity to talk to both the newer lawyers as well as folks who maybe have been there, done that. So we have all those different opportunities, but I know over time I could keep talking, but I'll turn it back over to Jennie.
Thank you all so much. This has been incredibly informative and helpful, and I learned some new things, which is great. So thank you so much. And now I'll hand it back to Chris.
Thank you all so much. So now we are going to turn it to Sam Halpert from Now. He is going to give us a brief presentation on resources that they have, including the PSLF. And then we're going to come back and ask questions. And the questions can be for our panelists here or for Sam. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight Sam. And then I'm going to actually make you a co-host so you can share your screen. Wonderful. Incredible. Sam, if you'd like to introduce yourself and start with your presentation. Oh, I can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yes, I can hear you
Oh,
now.
good.
Wonderful.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I apologize, everyone. I'm only just getting my voice back. This is going to be a short presentation, both because what I have to offer is, I think, less important than what you've heard already and what people will be able to sort of share with you in questions and answers. And because I can't talk for all that long right now, and I apologize for that. My name is Sam Halpert. I'm the Director of Public Service Initiatives at the National Association for Law Placement. One of our public service initiatives is a website called psjd.org, and it is a clearinghouse for public interest jobs that require or prefer candidates with formal legal training. And there's a special focus on that website on postgraduate fellowships of the kind that you are hearing about tonight. So I really appreciate the Washington Council of Lawyers for taking the time each year to give me a few moments to talk with you a little bit about how we try and track these positions for your convenience on our site. Okay, so just really quickly, I want to show you how it is that we define a postgraduate fellowship on PSJD. You've heard a lot about what these positions are from the perspective of organizations that cultivate and curate them. This is how we categorize them on the website. The least important definition that you're seeing tonight, but it gives you some insight into what you're seeing when you look at our tools. So these are positions that are term limited. They're not sort of an indefinite job, but they're defined by a particular work period of usually 1 or 2 years. They're intended for entry-level candidates, candidates within 0 to 3 years of having attained their legal training. They offer opportunities for learning and growth, and they are likely to recur. That's more important for our purposes than for yours, but the fact that we think about them that way affects what you might find when you look at our tools, and that's why I mention it. We also break them down according to a few different categories that have to do with how the application process might differ from one fellowship type to another. So this is not something that's going to be important to the organizations that you end up working with ultimately, but it might have a big impact on the nature of the job search itself, which is part of what you've been hearing about tonight. So the most familiar kind and the kind that you were hearing a lot about are what we call project-based fellowships. And they have an application process that's similar to, nonprofit grant writing, where you have to sort of develop an idea and pitch it and find funding for it. Importantly, from our perspective, looking at things through the lens of legal hiring, it's sort of this 2-stage process where first you convince an institution that you have an idea that they want to try and find funding for, and then the two of you set out to secure funding for that idea. Most of them are these well-known national groups, like the groups that you've heard of over the course of today. There are occasionally smaller funders out there that are worth keeping an eye out for. This is one. I'm sorry, my voice is running low much faster than I expected it to. I apologize. This is one that typically reaches out to me to ask if I can help them find more candidates. This is not tied to a particular legal employer like Skadden or Justice Catalyst or EJW. It is suitable for a wide variety of employers. You can find an employer and pair with them to pitch the Connecticut Bar Foundation. What's limited about this is that it needs to be an organization located in the state of Connecticut. And so if you are interested in working with an employer in the state of Connecticut, there is this additional option that exists. And there are a handful of these smaller, more targeted funders sprinkled around the country. Although, going with the major ones like those you've heard from tonight is a good first step for sure. The other kind, or a second kind that we track on the website, is what we call organizational fellowships. These are the same as project-based fellowships in all those key things I laid out at the outset. Term limited employment, intended to be an opportunity for learning and growth, entry level, likely to recur, but the source of the funding is internal to the organization. That is, making space for the fellowship. There isn't this second step of finding a source of funding in partnership with an organization. And so the application process is a one-step process as opposed to two, which makes a big distinction. Some of these are dedicated to a specific project, but some of them are also just general purpose. And I've even heard of some legal employers experimenting with structuring what they think of internally as staff attorney positions, or positions where they're ideally looking for somebody for indefinite employment, but structuring them at the outset as a fellowship, so that entry-level candidates can have the experience of sort of working with an organization for a year or two and deciding if it's a good fit for them as well as for the employer. That was sort of something that surprised me when I heard it a few years ago, but I've heard of a few employers that talk about things that way. And then the third kind of fellowships that we track on PSJD are not related to the kind that you've heard about tonight, but they're worth thinking about. Those are clinical or academic fellowships. Here, the application process is very similar to applying for a clinical or research staff position, working on public interest causes within the educational structure of experiential learning and practice at a law school. These are different often from the other kinds of fellowships because they are intended to offer graduates an opportunity to get into a legal teaching track sort of career. That said, if you find one that's within a clinic that's related to work that you want to do, there's no reason why you couldn't use that to develop a public interest practice career as well. But we categorize them differently again because the application process tends to work out differently. And then finally, it's worth noting that there are postgraduate fellowships that are not expressly intended for candidates with legal training that may still be interesting to you. We think of these as non-legal fellowships. We don't make an overt effort to catalog and track them the way that we do on PSJD with legal fellowships. Excuse me. If we come across them, we list them, but we don't make an overt effort to track them. There are some other tools for tracking them. These would be positions that would say something like an advanced training in a relevant field, such as public health, economics, or law required. And so you would be competing against people with different kinds of graduate degrees, looking at a problem that has multiple dimensions, one of which is a legal dimension. And public health and economics are two really common ones to sort of be cross-listed with law in that way. So what can we do on PSJD as far as searching for these? First of all, if you visit the site, and if you haven't looked at it yet, I encourage you to. Odds are most of the people on this call will have access to it for free. If you are associated with one of our subscriber schools, and many schools, most schools in the United States subscribe to the service. If you have any questions about it, you can reach out to me. I'll list my email address at the end. The primary tool that we have is our job database. If you look in the job database, you can sort really easily for the postgraduate fellowships. They're listed here, and they're broken down in exactly this way that I just mentioned. Organizational fellowships, meaning internally funded, project-based fellowships, and these clinical academic fellowships. The other thing to notice here are these little historical markers. This is sort of a plinth. These appear next to positions, and this screenshot is a good example. Okay, these appear next to positions that are no longer currently accepting candidates that we've kept around for historical reasons that I'll get into in a moment. If you're interested in looking for organizations that are currently seeking fellows to apply for project funds with, or for project funders that are currently seeking ideas that are in need of funding, you can toggle them off with this button above the search bar over on the right, and they will helpfully disappear. When you start to search for any of the fellowship job types, you'll also see a new button appear above the search bar that lets you view our fellowship calendar, which is a different way of looking at the same data, where you can see when these jobs were first entered into our system or what their application deadline is. And importantly, it is a calendar that has no year listed on it, and you can sort of look at information going between 2 and 5 years back in our system. All of that is because of that last component that I mentioned at the beginning, that these are likely to recur. And because of that, if you know that a particular organization is always trying to recruit a project-based fellow every year or every other year pretty consistently, if you see that they had an application deadline internally of August 20th in 2024, and that they, posted their notice in July, you can sort of make note for yourself that you should keep an eye out for that organization's notice to go live sometime, next month, and that you will be preparing it over the course of July and August. And so it's helpful to look backward at what's happened in previous years because of the recurrent nature of these fellowship notices. I thought that the last slide here was my contact information. I see that it isn't. Give me just one moment here.
That's all right, Sam. I'll include your contact information in the follow-up email so that
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, folks can get it fairly easily.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Chris. That's it for me. I hope that was brief enough. That was my intention. As I said, hopefully helpful, but everything that you've heard from others tonight has been far more, I think, immediate and relevant. Thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you. All right, so I am now going to open the floor up for audience questions. And Sam, I'm going to keep you pinned in case anybody has any questions about any of the information that you just shared. So feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat. If you would like to ask a question anonymously, you can message me directly and I will ask your question for you. Or if you'd like to come off mute and ask your question directly, you can also do that. And if I